With particularly the stormwater utility, one thing to sort of to highlight is when we call something a fee and when we call something a tax, and something in New Jersey that's been really a tradition for a long time, which is, the polluter pays principle, which is if you pollute, whether you're ExxonMobil and you have a tanker in the Hudson River that explodes and washes up all kinds of oil, or you're DuPont and you've been manufacturing Teflon and PFOA and PFAS, which are linked to cancer, make it into our wells. We have a long tradition of holding polluters accountable. The interesting thing is, as homeowners and businesses, we don't always think of ourselves as a polluter, right? Because someone allowed us to build a building. And in today's code for new construction, the stormwater rules the thresholds are pretty high. Mostly what we're looking to address is stuff that happened a long time ago where folks didn't really understand the impacts that were going to happen. And so I always like to say, if humans cause a problem, we also can solve a problem. And this is an approach to do that. So if polluters are paying because you're, delivering polluted runoff, untreated and unabsorbed into the ground, the reason we call it a fee is because you can get a credit for, and reduce that fee for being less of a polluter. And that's really a difference. And so there's a couple questions that we got related to that, like how does this work in other states? And what does it all really mean? And I'll just, at the top level, say, it looks very different lots of places. So in rural communities that are doing a lot of farming, the way that they handle this is different than places that don't have any farms and have all industrial development. And sort of who picks up a burden and at what level really varies. And the nice thing about this is it's locally controlled. So you get to decide if you go that direction, what it looks like. If there is a fee, what do the credits look like? If there is a fee, how much is it? Who's actually paying? And what is it going to? Those are all things you get to articulate. And with time, we're going to find out more too about the guidance. So one of the questions here is, does the assessment have to be based on the impervious surface itself? How much impervious surface? Do they have to go around with a ruler and measure? Do they have to look at a satellite photo? And I thought maybe I could just pass this to Gary if you want to talk a little bit about some of the different methods of assessing who the polluter is in this case and how much they've done to address the stormwater that's on their property or unmitigated.
Thank you, Ed. Short answer to the question is yes. Typically the fee is based on impervious coverage. So to give you an example, if you were in a city and you were an owner of a big parking lot with a lot of runoff coming off of it, or you had a residence in that town. If you were doing it on a property tax basis, the gentleman, whoever, or the gal who owns the property, the parking lot, obviously from the property tax approach, would not be paying in proportion to the problem as they would in this program, right? This program is based on impervious coverage. So the big shopping mall with the big parking lot area, the big parking lot for cars or whatever it might be. This program tends to hit that particular property owner harder than the person who has a lot less impervious coverage. It's built on impervious coverage. Now there's three typical ways of doing that. Sometimes it's just a flat rate, which is probably not that often seen. There are tiers being smaller properties in tier 1, bigger properties in tier 4 or 5, and the fee goes up as you go down. But most typically, they create a standard measure. It's called an ERU. It's an equivalent residential unit. What they basically do is they take all the impervious coverage in the town, and they divide it by how many people are property owners in the town, and they get an average, right? Let's say the average is 2,000 feet. And so if the fee is, and then they set the rate, right? The rate is a function of your budget. How much work are you doing in stormwater, and how much work needs to be done, maybe for the lake, in the stormwater sense. So you have a rate, and you have an average what they call ERU, equivalent residential unit, and they multiply the two and you get what you owe. Now, if you're the parking lot owner and you've got a very big parking lot, it's going to be ERU times 4, and then they take that and they multiply it by the fee. So the point I'm trying to get across here is this program is built typically, and answer to Ed's question, yes, it's built around impervious coverage, but there are a few ways of doing it. And it's all up to the town to figure out which way works best for it.
Awesome. And in some places, what they've done is they have like you mentioned this, like a flat rate, because it just worked out better. Single family home, this. Or no, we're not charging homes at all, we're just charging, businesses over a certain size. It can look a little bit different. So this question kind of builds on that one. It says, like, are impervious things, driveways, and sidewalks being looked into? And the answer would be dependent on how and if they're locally implemented, what folks decide. Julia mentioned about pervious pavement. Has anyone ever come across that? Is that something, when we say it?
The question was supposed to be pervious driveway or sidewalk. I've used the wrong word.
Oh, okay, driveways or sidewalks.
Yeah, like for parking lots and stuff.
Yeah, so that was a big part of it. There's also pervious driveways. And has anyone ever seen one?
Are you talking about grass pavers like that?
I'm talking about blacktop that has holes in it that leads into 2 feet of crushed rock that you can dump a dump truck of water on it and it just goes boom right into the earth. So the question I always have is it's a little bit more expensive to put that in a business, but what if there was some grant available to make up the difference? How different would it be? There would be no runoff, right? And so if we're going to try to get to where we know we need to go, we need to look at solutions that help push people encourage or incentivize people into doing that thing that's going to make a really big positive impact on the water quality.
When we discussed pervious
Hold on one second.
before, we've always been told that the grit fills it up that they use on the roads around here, and that within a year or two, it's no longer pervious. Have you had any experience with that?
I have heard. Do you want to address that? Do you have yeah, I have heard that. So that's not an uncommon criticism. I'm not sure how realistic that is, because we have one in our town. I live in Somerset in Franklin, and it's a basketball court. And it's not only great to absorb water, but it's also great because it dries really quickly, and everyone can play basketball right away after a rainstorm. So everyone loves it. But if you want to, and I don't think they vacuum it or anything.
I think it's important that pervious pavement be used in the right places. It's not ideal for high traffic places, but it is ideal for less trafficked places, and driveways are a perfect example. Some people have long driveways, and if you can do that with a pervious pavement, that's a whole lot of blacktop that's no longer producing runoff, for which you get credit. I also wanted, the question of was sidewalks came up a minute ago. Next to sidewalks, we have seen rain gardens that are only 3 feet wide, sometimes even less than that, running along next to a sidewalk that can absorb a tremendous amount of runoff. Scale is important, but and scaling your green infrastructure to provide the solution that you're looking for, and there are many different ways to do it.
This question specifically is for Lisa, who's seated. I don't know if you want to come up here or you want to just shout from the middle of the room. So the question is, how is the Highlands Council funded? I think it's a pretty fair question. And then you mentioned recharge ratio, and what does that mean to those of us who are in your lexicon?
Okay. Can I shout? Is that all right? Okay. The Highlands Council is a state agency funded through state appropriations. We get all of our operational funding from the state. We also get occasional grants. We have been very successful in obtaining U.S. Fish and Wildlife grants, primarily for our land preservation programs. And we also receive from time to time settlement money as mitigation for environmental projects in the Highlands region. So those are the sources of our funding. I'm actually, if it's okay with you, going to turn the